Understanding how to properly process a kick drum is a must for any engineer, but a mistake I see made time and time again is to under or over process this vital track. In so many genres, the kick drum is really the backbone of the song, so learning to get this right is going to elevate your mixes dramatically. So in this video, I'll be explaining how you can learn this process, and by the end of it, you'll have a simple blueprint you can follow the next time you go to perfect your kick drum sound. And to do that, I'll be breaking this video down into two parts. The first part will cover how you can hear and conceptualize different areas of the kick drum, so that within a matter of seconds, you'll be able to quickly know what frequency areas will need adjusting. And the second part will be a mixing walkthrough where I show you how I turned a kick drum from sounding like this to this. But before we start, if you want to get your mixes to sound like professional songs, I recommend checking out Sage Audio's mixing and mastering membership. As a member, I have to say the experience is incredible. Just for signing up, you receive 20 free mastered songs per year with your own dedicated mastering engineer, unlimited mixing feedback, and access to Sage Audio University for in-depth mixing and mastering courses. But more on that at the end of the video. So let's begin by listening to an unprocessed kick drum track. Now I'm going to be predominantly working with acoustic kick drums instead of electronic or synthesized ones, as anything electronic can be much more easily shaped during the songwriting and recording process with LFO tools and whatnot. Whereas acoustic or live kick drums, you're somewhat stuck with the sound that you initially captured or have been sent to mix. I'll play this unprocessed kick drum first, and I want you to focus on all the frequencies you're hearing and also how this unprocessed sound compares to what you're typically used to hearing from a mixed kick drum in your favorite songs. If you're not used to hearing an unprocessed kick, you may be surprised by how much of the frequency spectrum it covers. Typically, you'd associate these as being low frequency instruments, which they are, but as you can see on this analyzer, there's a lot going on in both the mid and high range as well. This is why I like to separate out kick drum sounds into three key areas, these being the lows, which is roughly anything from 100 Hz and below, the body of the kick, which makes up the mid range, so we can say from about 140 Hz to around a kilohertz, broadly speaking, and then the high end or click, which is mostly anything from 2K and above. These aren't absolutes, and they will change depending on the kick drum you're mixing. The more important takeaway here is to simply understand the three sections that together give you your kick drum sound. So if you envision your kick drum as being made up of the low end, the body, and the click, I think this is a really helpful way of deconstructing the sound and then deciding how you want to alter these three areas to give you your ideal kick drum sound. Let's go one step further here, and I'll solo these ranges out so you can get a better feel for what each section adds to the overall sound. Starting with the lows, you want to listen to this part on headphones or monitors if you're not already to get the most out of this portion of the video. So as you can hear, this section is really filling out the low end of the kick. Part of that is that deep chest thumping sound that I'm sure you'll be familiar with if you've ever been to any live concerts. This is also what can make this specific area a little challenging to mix, as it's more felt rather than heard. Learning to accurately level this and knowing when too much or too little of this frequency range is present in your kick drum will certainly take time and practice to achieve. It's one of the few instances where I would recommend mixing this using a frequency analyzer along with using your ears if you don't have the most ideal setup to begin with. It can also be heavily genre dependent. For instance, the amount of low end in a kick drum in a jazz song is going to be drastically different from that of a pop or EDM song. So these are things to consider when first approaching mixing a kick drum too. Another helpful thing to do here would be to use reference tracks within the genre you're working on, just so you have a baseline to compare your kick drum to. Next up is the body of the kick, which sounds like this. This is mostly what defines the way we perceive a kick drum sound tonally in a mix. So some faster, heavier styles of music might make use of a more scooped kick drum sound, whereas something like a slow indie pop track may have more of this area pushed, as it has more room and space to bloom. It's often where you'll find a lot of the muddy or woofy frequencies, which sounds like a bad thing purely based on those descriptors, but again, this is completely genre dependent, so identifying what works for the genre you mix in is really what's important here. And lastly, we have the high end of the kick, which sounds like this. This is usually the area you'll want to target if your kick drum is getting lost or struggling to cut through a dense arrangement. It's quite surprising just how much boosting this one area can really help to give your kick drum more clarity in a mix. For instance, just listen to how much clearer my kick drum sounds here, once I start boosting the high end. So now you have a better understanding of the key areas that make up the kick drum sound. Let's now walk through the process of how to actually mix one. Usually the kick drum is one of the first tracks I'll start with when first sitting down to mix a song. And I'll try to keep the processing pretty straightforward, typically making use of 3 main effects and one that's a bit more case specific, which I'll touch on at the end. So first up is a gate. Now I like to gate my kicks early on, so that I can really control the length of it before I feed it through any compression later on in the signal chain. This isn't always necessary. As I've said many times previously, it's heavily dependent on the context of the mix and the genre you're working in. I like to think of this similar to how LFO tools are used in electronic music, so this is kind of a similar approach, but for more organic styles of music. It's really just about controlling the length of the kick. You don't want too much sustain if you're mixing a fast punk song, because this will just eat away into other elements of the track. It's also the reason why I like to gate this at the start, because once you apply compression and other similar effects, you may be increasing the sustain of the kick that way too. I'll first let you listen to the full mix so you have the context for how and why I'll be using this gate plugin. So as my track is quite fast paced, I really don't need much sustain out of this kick. Something short and snappy is going to fit far better within the context of this song. I've chosen to use the fastest attack settings and a medium release so that the body of the kick drum remains present, but it's just removing that woofy, subby noise you can hear in the background. I set the ratio quite high at 10:1 and lowered the threshold down, along with trying to get the timing of the gate to fit well within the tempo of my song. I'll play a quick before and after here so you can hear how this gate helps to tighten up my kick drum sound, along with reducing that woofy sustain that's present in the unprocessed sound. Next up is the EQ. This is easily the biggest night and day difference you'll hear from any plugin I use in this chain. I'll play a quick AB for you first, and then we'll dive into the settings and more importantly, the reason behind these moves. Pretty big difference, right? Looking at my EQ, you may think there's a lot going on, but to simplify what you're looking at, I'm mostly removing a lot of the mud from the kick drum, which if you recall from my gating example, this track has its fair share of. So that's what these 4 bell cuts are doing, which range from about 140Hz up to just under 700Hz. If I bypass this, you'll hear how much mud these 4 cuts are removing, and in turn are also helping to brighten up my kick drum. And then it's just a subtle high and low shelf, which are both boosting about 3 dB to add a bit more weight and presence. I didn't do any crazy boosts here, as I felt like these 2 areas were already well represented in the unprocessed track, and it was really just the body of the kick that needed the most amount of attention here. Lastly, I've got a high pass filter on to remove some of the excess low end that's really not needed in this track. And the last of the 3 plugins I'm using is a compressor. I've gone for a distressor style compressor as I like the smacky but round sound they can impart on kick drums. As for the settings, I've got an attack of 10 and a release set at 5.4. I'm also using the distortion free setting, which adds a tape-like distortion to the signal, helping to round out the top and bottom of my kick drum's transient. If I AB this compression, you'll hear how it helps to give my kick drum a nice round sound. So those are my 3 go-to plugins whenever mixing kicks. As I mentioned earlier, there's also a 4th plugin that I'll occasionally use when I feel like something is lacking in my kick drum, and that is a transient designer. For this mix, I did in fact end up using one, and as you can see here, all I'm doing is adding a tiny bit of attack back into the kick drum sound, which I felt was lacking after the initial compression stage. I'll normally decide to do this after referencing my kick drum sound within the context of the full mix. If I feel like it's not quite cutting through, I may either choose to add more click, which like we discussed earlier can be done through boosting the high range, or using a transient designer. So I'll do one final AB of this whole plugin chain so you can hear the before and after within the context of the entire mix. As I mentioned earlier, if you want to get your mixes to sound like professional songs, I encourage you to check out Sage Audio's mixing and mastering membership. As a member, I have to say the experience is incredible. Just for signing up, you receive 20 free mastered songs per year with your own dedicated mastering engineer, unlimited mixing feedback, and access to Sage Audio University mixing and mastering courses, which include start to finish walkthrough sessions for various genres and 35 multi-track sessions for hands-on practice. This platform is supported by their thriving community and tight-knit network of audio engineers. Every day, I see and hear great wins in the membership from both new and seasoned engineers, noticing a huge improvement in their mixes and masters after joining. Right now, you can join the Sage Audio membership with a special discount using the link in the description. So join today and start creating mixes that sound like professional songs.